Thanks, Harry and Shanti, and welcome to the customer panel on what does a future-proofed human layer security strategy look like. I'm Henry, and I head up our customer success team here at Tessian. It's so exciting to see that we are finally announcing our human layer security intelligence platform to the world. I'm very lucky in the sense I have the privilege of working with customers to mitigate these types of risks every day. And I know the huge impact that the ability to get better insights and automated intelligence is going to have. And we're also very lucky to have some of those customers joining me today to discuss the impact of remote working on their cybersecurity strategies. Each of our panelists bring a different perspective from the security and data privacy world. So we'll be coming at things from all angles today, and hopefully we'll cover all bases. So let's kick off with some really brief introductions. Clive, do you want to kick us off by introducing yourself, and then let's go to Angela and then on to Ollie?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Clive Novus. I'm the Chief IT Risk Officer of Investec.
Hi, everybody. I'm Angela Henry, and I'm the Business Information Security Officer at Rand Merchant Bank in South Africa.
And hello, I'm Ollie Bethel. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Travers Smith.
Great. Thanks for that, guys. So to kick us off, with so many of us transitioning over to a remote working environment almost overnight, a huge amount of agility and reprioritization has been required from technology and security leaders to keep up with the changing environments that we find ourselves in. One of the first challenges that we're certainly seeing is understanding how this change affects and impacts the people in your organizations. I'd love to understand how each of you have learned about how people behave and how they handle data differently to when they're working at home. So perhaps, Angela, if we could start with you and then on to Ollie and then on to Clive.
So what we're finding is that people are sending mails to non-work related mail accounts because obviously we have some restrictions in place on work machines. So that has impacted how they're able to print, etc. at home. So they're sending their files to Gmail, etc., to be able to then circumvent the controls we have.
That's really interesting. Do you think that it's because the attitudes are becoming more relaxed, or it's more that, needs must and they need to access this data and therefore that's the only way they can do that?
I think people need to get their work done, and they will find a way to work around the controls if it doesn't work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Ollie, I'd love to understand your perspectives. How's it changed things for your lawyers at Travers?
That challenge that Angela talked about is something that historically we've had to deal with in law firms where we've always been biased towards security over productivity. And in these scenarios, I think we then discover that actually what we're doing is creating a sort of a backdoor route to potential data loss. Actually using the Tessian tools, we've been able to identify if anyone were to try to send attachments to webmails, they had to put a justification in for that. And then if that justification doesn't meet our policy, we have a conversation with them to understand what their intention is and see whether we need to make any changes. We invested quite heavily last year to really improve ease of working for agile working, not really with this particular scenario in mind of a pandemic, but certainly the ability for people to work where they need to. So we've managed to resolve a number of the challenges that were preventing people from working that way. I think as people have gone into lockdown, what we're finding from the sort of information security perspective is actually for people that are maybe working in shared flats or shared houses, they're finding that being able to have confidential conversations can sometimes be difficult, and so they're finding quite interesting ways to make sure that they stay private. So we kind of assume that everybody's got an easy place to work, but actually I think the pandemic is proving that people are finding it a little bit uncomfortable, and so we're trying to give them the tools to be able to work where they need to.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point because when you, excuse me, when you think about it, it's not only are you catering just for a remote workforce in terms of everyone just working at their desk at home, but it's like every single person's individual circumstances and then how that plays to like the data security policies and priorities that you have in place. So it's you're constantly adapting your policy to ensure that it suits everyone in their like individual working circumstances. Clive, over to you. How about at Investec? How have you sensed a change in attitudes? Have you seen any kind of behaviors that you hadn't seen previously in terms of how people handle data or act in relation to security?
Yeah, I think a little bit of a combination between Angela and Ollie's has been our experience. So, firstly, we enabled a remote workforce long before COVID hit. So everyone had laptops, everyone had VPN technology. So people were always able to work from wherever. So our security tools, including Tessian, didn't really need to change all that much as a result of COVID, because we enabled that already. We found that our users are very much well-intentioned. So, you know, what Angela was saying in terms of they want to do work, they want to access the files. But there were some limitations in terms of, you know, needing to physically print paper and then sign it, for example. So we had to change some of the ways in which those business processes work and roll out different technologies in order to have, you know, wet signatures. In terms of people's behavior, again, we had a lot of queries around, can I do this? Can't I do this? You know, am I allowed to send this home? Can't I send this home? Or how do I send this home securely? So we've had to get on the front foot in terms of, you know, educating our users in how to use the tools which were in place already. But you know, so far we've seen, you know, very positive response from our user base towards some of the security tools which we have in place. And as I say, they're well intentioned, and they want to do the right thing. We just need to be able to enable them.
Yeah, and I think that's such a huge thing, isn't it? Is like making sure you're enabling them to be able to work. As Ollie said, you know, having that bias towards productivity. It is not feasible to like lock everyone down and say, oh, just now because you're working at home, controls need to get even tighter. In many ways, we need to like understand the pressures that people are under and make their lives even easier at work. But hopefully, you know, augmenting them with awareness and technology to help them do so. Ollie, you mentioned a little bit about the justifications that you use within the Tessian platform to get good visibility of risks. And that's kind of an area I wanted to go down next, which is understanding the visibility of the risks that you have across your organization. And it's something that I think is often unintentionally underplayed. We recently did a DLP survey, and it showed that email risks are 38 times more likely than IT leaders predict, which is like a pretty like astonishing fact. With users now being in home offices all across the world and, you know, different parts of the country, etc., how do you ensure, Ollie, at Travers, that you have insight into the developing threats and trends that you may hear like more anecdotally when you're in the office?
So for us, it's all about education. So, and I think this is really at the forefront of what Tessian approaches, which is ultimately it's our people that are probably the biggest risk, but they're also the ones that are personally responsible. And I think everybody at Travers recognises that and takes personal responsibility for maintaining security. So we have a big education program. We run constant phishing exercises where we internally phish our own people with targeted emails based on current events, and then we track the behavior to see what the response is like. Interestingly, we've seen a little bit of a tick up in terms of the clicks as we've gone into lockdown. I think that's probably as a result of people working in different conditions. Although people are going to be at their desk all day, I think the boundaries between work and home are blurred a bit. So people are taking their personal devices, their personal mobile with them, or their work phone, and then maybe having a quick scroll on emails while they're distracted and can quite easily click on something, particularly if it's highly targeted to some of the things that are going on in the world at the moment. What has been quite positive to see is people making much more use of the Tessian report and delete button within Outlook. So we can see that although there is an increase in the clicking, actually it's being exceeded by an increase in the amount of reporting that's going on. So I think for us, it's really just been interesting to see perhaps people are a bit more distracted as we've gone into lockdown. We're just trying to reinforce through education as much as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of education, and Angela, I'd love to hear your perspectives on this. In terms of education, often when we think about like mitigating these security risks, as Ollie just touched on, one of the first steps to effective mitigation is awareness and making sure that users are aware of the sophistication and also the presence of the risks to effectively drive preventative behaviors. Do you think that awareness is harder to create when someone it's the informality, right, of being at home, and it's the informality of like you're sat on the sofa and as Ollie said, or you may be at lunch and you're just sort of looking at your phone. Do you think people are engaging as much in like awareness and training around security in a remote working environment, or do you see challenges there?
So I do see challenges. Obviously, when you're in the office, it's a controlled environment. You can target specific awareness and training campaigns. At home, it's a little bit more difficult. But I think what we've tried to do is we've tried to engage with a more personal kind of link to it. So bringing it back to how to keep you and your family safe, linked into your data as well as the company data. Then you find that people are more willing to, the controls are more palatable if they can actually understand the reason why.
Completely agree. And I think it also just shows a real human touch that's so important for people to engage in something that is like ultimately, they're the best judge of whether those emails coming in are the right emails or the wrong emails in terms of whether they should be responding, and resonating with them in that way is just such an important element. Clive, to touch back a little bit on visibility of risks, and I was speaking to a CISO the other day who gave me really interesting insight, saying that this new world that we live in terms of remote working and all of the pressures that our users face on a day-to-day basis, it's really challenged what priorities people should be thinking about and what risks are the risks that we should be tackling in the near term. Angela there just touched on a few, and Ollie in fact touched on a few COVID-specific risks, for example, like spear phishing. I'd love to understand how you think about identifying those newer threats that you see within your user base, and then how you decide whether you focus time and efforts on those risks in the near term or whether they just go as part of a risk register and something to solve for later.
Yeah, so risk identification, or scanning the world in terms of what's really happening, comes from many different sources. So firstly, we have a threat intel function with threat intel feeds from some of the big vendors. So that's one source in terms of what's going on and what are the new threats which working from home and COVID has thrown at us, really. The second one is, talking to great people like yourselves and the good people at Tessian, but also the other CISOs and information security officers and tech risk managers around the globe, which we're members of various forums. So we share a lot of information, we talk to each other, and we come up with sort of common themes which everyone is facing. And then we take those back to our organizations. And then the last one is actually looking at what's happening with our user base. Are we seeing changes in behavior? So we have UBA technology which is rolled out across all of our laptops. We also look at things like some of the Tessian reports to understand the changes in our user behavior. So we get a lot of information from a lot of different people, and then we bring that back and we have information security forums and prioritization sessions, and we say, look, this is what A, B, and C are seeing, or these are the changes in behavior. Is it worth investigating this further? Is it worth investment? Is it worth enhancing the controls? And we have a prioritization session together with our CIO and our CISO and other key stakeholders, like people from operational risk or internal audit.
And do you think that the kind of like business involvement in those committees and I guess, like executive, like non-security executive involvement in security risks. Do you think the emphasis has changed at all with in a remote working environment where there's more emphasis towards making sure that we're focusing on those risks which are particularly prevalent with remote working, or kind of are you already on top of that? Because it seems like everyone on this call were pretty ahead of the curve in terms of having remote working set up before this pandemic hit.
Yeah, I mean, business engagement is key, right? Because ultimately we're trying to enable a remote workforce in a secure way. So, we've certainly almost stepped up our engagement with key business stakeholders to make sure that their users are able to function. Like a silly example is there are some signatures which actually have to be done in in ink. So we've sent we've sent printers to people's houses, but we've also sent shredders to people's houses to make sure that once the document is signed and scanned, then it can be destroyed in a secure way. So certainly we've had to engage our business leaders to make sure that the workforce is operating in a secure manner.
Yeah, I really like that. A very relevant response to kind of like the pressures that you don't necessarily think about in the office. I certainly don't have a shredder at home. So it'd be difficult if I had to get rid of a document, or a lot of cutting paper with scissors probably. It's likely that we're never going to return to a lot of people are talking about how this changes the work environment for good. Yes, I'm sure we'll all return to the office in the near future, but probably in a very different capacity. And with that, security strategies are inevitably going to develop and change and evolve with the different working practices that we have. The way that we see it, and we speak about quite a lot at Tessian, is that security used to be a lot about securing the network or devices that your users operate within or on, but now it's a lot more complex. Ollie, I'd love to understand to what extent that you think we now need to turn our focus to the people that we're trying to protect and really double down on this human layer security element of protecting users.
Yeah, so I think, as mentioned, the previous question for us it's about education, but the other element of it is really understanding how our people need to work in order to meet the expectations of our clients. So one of the things that we've seen, like I'm pretty sure every business, as we've gone into lockdown, there's been this huge push towards the big web conferencing platforms. So initially that was Zoom, and I think in recent weeks that started to become Teams. So one of the advantages for us from a technology perspective is that means that we've been able to roll out software that previously would have taken months with lots of very hands-on training. We've been able to just do it in a matter of days with just a launch email. And actually, it's been fantastic to see people just grab hold of it because they know that's what needs to be used in order to deliver the service that's expected. But with that, people are going to need constant support because the tools are changing very quickly. We've seen with Zoom and Microsoft's release cadence that new features are being added all of the time. And a lot of stuff has been in the news around Zoom, for example, how easy it is to accidentally leave your Zoom meeting insecure. So we're having to just reinforce training all of the time. Instead of it being in the sort of traditional training programs that we might have used, we have daily updates. We're just providing updates at every opportunity within team meetings because the software is just changing all of the time, and our people are having to adjust and get used to that really, really quickly. So that's probably been the biggest challenge for us, but also a great opportunity as well.
Do you see users in turn engaging a lot more in terms of you mentioned that training can be cut down to like very different ways that you were doing previously. Do you see getting users really like embracing that new technology now because they know how much it's going to help them, whereas previously they could perhaps avoid it being in the office?
Yes. So we went from, because Travis Smith has one office in London and also an office in Paris, but most of the population are within London. So much of the internal communication is done face to face, which means that the need for tools like Slack or Teams hasn't been as much demand as perhaps in other organisations. That means that we've just made use of Skype for Business for the past few years, and since we went into lockdown, the usage of that for web meetings obviously just skyrocketed. very quickly, people started to realize they wanted to do different things. They were getting experience of using Teams or Zoom and working with clients or other third parties. So they've suddenly been pushing us, saying, we want these new tools, we want these new tools. And that's great for us, because actually the adoption push-pull has really shifted. So our focus now is just trying to keep up with the demand rather than having to push new technology onto people. So it's a great opportunity, but obviously we need to make sure that we do it carefully and safely as much as possible, and don't rush to push technology out until we're really confident we've secured it in the right way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great catalyst for change in many respects. Angela, hitting on something that you mentioned earlier, which really resonated, which was it's about educating your employees and making them understand how these security risks and these new working environments can affect them. And I think that one thing that we've certainly been reflecting on at Tessian, and one of our values is human first, is recognizing that it's a really stressful time for everyone, right? Like there's a lot of changes both inside work but also outside work, some of which are really overwhelming. How do you guys find like balancing delivering a risk mitigation approach, but with also not overburdening your employees, that they have all of these security obligations and they have to work securely 100% of the time? And how do you communicate that effectively to users?
So I think what we've tried to do is, where possible, we've put some technology in place to mitigate the risk where possible, and then we've tried to educate. But it's very difficult because you have to try and understand. Certainly in SA, we've been in lockdown, I think it's 71 odd days.
Wow.
And yeah, and it's been very stressful because everybody's home environment is different, and our schools have been closed for 71 odd days. So you've got somebody at home who's trying to be a teacher to their children, as well as try to do their work at their normal day job. And then in SA, data is pretty expensive. So we've got all of those, and connectivity is not great. And, we've got all the other infrastructure type challenges, and to try to understand the human aspect as to what anxiety and stress that individual has got, because everybody's is going to be different, and try to make it as easy as possible for them to comply and to work securely. And again, if you relate it back to their personal environment, everybody wants their children in their home to be safe. So we've tried to use that angle in terms of awareness and education.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. And I think that I feel like I know my co-workers and customers in a more intimate way than ever before, because you do get kids coming on the screen, or a dog walking past, or our CFO always has a cat walking across her desk, and it's really important that we understand and kind of let that element of people's personal lives come into both our relationships at work, but also how we think about protecting them, because that's how we can really focus on them first. Clive, I'd love to understand, taking that a little bit further and understanding, the challenge of trying to protect users across many different jurisdictions and geographies. How do you balance the world is reacting at very different paces to what's going on at the moment across the world? How do you balance a consistent approach across, the entirety of your user base, or do you take sort of more of a piecemeal approach? And yeah, I'd love to understand a little bit about that.
So it comes from the top. So we've got fantastic support both from our obviously CIO, but more importantly from the CEO. So the tone is set from the top in terms of the security culture and being able to make sure that the controls are effective, but not only that, is that the controls are consistent across the globe. So we've standardized on, as I was saying, one laptop build with one set of technology, with one set of teams supporting that technology. So we've been able to do that with the support of the execs, really. it's got to come from the top. Else, you get into these, discussions. Australia want to do it one way, and New York want to do it another way, and then Ireland want to do it this, and and then you get into a mess, and then you're obviously only as strong as your weakest link. So we've taken the approach to standardize our security controls across the group, roll out technology like Tessian, for example, on everyone's laptop, and as I say, that support comes from the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that using technology to get feedback and like understand what your user base is doing in a really scalable way is something that we're really passionate about. And also making sure that when you're presenting your users with the opportunity to give that feedback, it's in relation to really relevant security events that have happened to them, because it really resonates with them and they understand the relevance. Really interesting insight. Thanks for that, guys. I'm going to move on to a question that we've had that's come in from the audience. So how do you create a strong security first presence when your employees are no longer in the office? And I think this goes back to a little bit about what we were talking about earlier, is the formality of going into the office can sometimes give you can like put you in the mindset that actually you're going into the office and you go through those controls and you have to work and act in a certain way. Ollie, I'd love to understand like how you've tried to do that and like kind of double down on security. You mentioned a little bit about like release cycles and how you manage new technology going out, but are there anything else that you've drawn on to help you do that?
I think there's probably two main things. One is we really try to introduce tools that are easy to use. So if a tool is easy to use, then generally it becomes the default way that something is done. And therefore it's the secure way that it's done. Just the example that Clive used around wetting signatures, we've moved and transitioned very quickly to using e-signature technology because that's the easiest and the quickest way to get the deal done. And that's, I think, will start to become the default. And obviously that has the security built into it. The other part of it is, back to that education point, we just bake in security when we talk about security in all of the columns that go out. So as we started to go into lockdown, we just really reinforced the point on people making sure that they had everything that they needed. They could use the tools that they needed, and they wouldn't have to use any other systems in order to continue to deliver client service. As we think about a potential return to the office and kind of get used to this new normal, it's just a continuation of that. So it's that constant education. It's making sure that people look out for any malicious emails. They're being mindful when they are sending anything out. Obviously, the Tessian tools are incredibly powerful in helping to protect us from ourselves, but we do really reinforce that ultimately the responsibility lies with the individual, and we can't rely on technology alone.
Yeah, no, really, really interesting insight, Ollie. And as a former lawyer myself, I'm very pleased to hear that lawyers are now using e-signatures and those technologies to make. Yeah, exactly. And this is what I mean, right? In many ways, we've like catapulted probably like 5 years in terms of adoption of some of these technologies, and I think hopefully that's going to be a real change for the good across technology.
It's just an accelerant. It's just an accelerant, isn't it? So it's all the stuff that actually once people try it, it works, and it works really well, then I think it will become the default. So electronic signatures, a lot of video conferencing, those kind of tools, I think will start to just become the default for how work is done.
And I think what really resonates with me there as well is what you mentioned about if you can introduce a bit of technology that is almost so frictionless that people see the immediacy of like the benefit that it has to them, then you're onto a winner because they come back to you and ask for more. Every time you introduce something which sort of slows them down or impedes productivity, then you're kind of like having to fight the battle next time, because that's like the assumption that may be the next impact.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you so much, all of you, for all of the amazing insight into what is a pretty bizarre time and pretty challenging roles that you all have. Really appreciate you taking time out of your days to share the different perspectives from all different angles. And a huge thank you to our audience for not only joining the session, but also asking some great questions. And sorry we didn't get time to tackle some more. That's all we have time for now. I'm going to hand back over to Kelly, who will take us on to the next session.